everybody, this is Laura, City Scrapper. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the March My Creative Scrapbook limited edition kit. I have been trying to get a lot of videos that I recorded and I edited, but I have not yet voiced over up onto my channel, and this is one of those videos. My intention is always to get all of my videos up on my channel by the end of the month, but life is just so busy, it just doesn't seem to happen as much as I would like it to. For this layout, I'm using one of the pear tree cut files that My Creative Scrapbook subscribers receive. It says Living My Best Life. I cut it out once with the inner cuts, and then I backed it with some of the pattern papers from the collection, and then I cut it out again without the inner cuts, and I glued that on the back of the cut file. That makes the cut file much more sturdy, and then I'm able to do my favorite thing with the cut file, which is stitch on it. I usually stitch on the letters that have the inner cuts. I'll stitch around that inside cut. You'll be able to see this in a few moments. I don't usually show the backing of the cut file on my channel because it takes so long, but I will link a video in the description box if you want to see more about how I prepare my cut files. I usually use the same process, but sometimes I mix it up a little bit. For this layout, I did the stitching with some white embroidery thread. Once I had completed the stitching, I added some fun foam to the back of the cut file. I used some white fun foam for the thinner letters. That way you wouldn't be able to see the fun foam from the front of the layout. And then I put some ATG adhesive on the back of the cut file to hold it down to the page. You can still move it around though, and that's really helpful for me because I will sometimes move the cut file once I start adding the photo and the embellishments to the layout. To embellish this layout, I'm using a lot of the dimensional flowers that we got in the March kit. Here I'm attaching them down using some Liquitex Heavy Matte Gel Medium. This is a great adhesive for things like flowers. One of the nice things about the 49 and Market flower packs that we got in the March kit is there were a lot of buds and small flowers that could also be incorporated into the flower clusters. So I'm going to add a number of those in a little while. On this layout, I'm including dark green flowers and light green flowers. I incorporated one dark green and one light green flower in each of the 3 clusters. To fill out the clusters a little bit more, I added some buds. In some cases, the buds were already in a cluster. That made them really easy to just go ahead and tuck into the cluster. And then some of the buds were separate, so I decided to use those in the smallest cluster on the right-hand side of the layout. I cut the wire stems short and then I arranged them until I was happy with the positioning and the placement. When I had positioned all of the flowers and the buds, I put the layout aside to allow the gel medium to dry. Now I am creating a mat for my photo. I'm using 2 different colors of Distress Oxide. I started off with some crackling campfire, and in a moment I'm going to be layering the candied apple Distress Oxide on top of the crackling campfire. And I think between these 2 different colors of Distress Oxide, the color looks pretty close to the red that's on the pattern paper. Distress oxides don't really mix together the way other inks and paints do, but they can be layered to create different effects. I added another layer of candied apple to make the color a little bit more intense. Once I had the mat for the photo ready, I placed it underneath the photo on the layout. Sometimes adhesive doesn't stick too well to the Distress Oxide. That's why I like to just put the Distress Oxide around the outside so I can put some adhesive in the center of the photo and then it will stick down to the mat. Luckily, the gel medium hadn't dried yet. Gel medium does take a little bit of time to dry thoroughly. So in this case, that's a good thing because I decided I wanted to ink the edges of the flowers. I'm using some Distress ink in Vintage Photo to ink all of the edges. I not only ink the flowers, but I also ink all of the buds and branches that are in each of the 3 clusters. I have 2 bright red butterflies placed on top of the cut file, but I am going to move those butterflies around a little bit. They are not attached down at this time. In addition to having flowers and clusters of buds and branches, The packs of flowers came with some large flat leaves. I want to incorporate some of these leaves on the layout, so I'm using the Distress ink in Vintage Photo, and I'm inking 3 of those leaves that were in the packs. I think those will look nice mixed in with the clusters. I thought the clusters looked just a little bit too small at this time. After I inked the leaves, I brought the layout back and I began to tuck one of these leaves or branches into each of the 3 clusters. I trimmed each of the branches down a little bit so that they would be the right size to fit in with each of the clusters. The photo that I'm using in this picture is from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This was from a trip from quite a few years ago now. My younger daughter Julia is holding this beautiful white cat. It was so cute when we got to the alpaca farm. The cat saw us from very far away, and unlike any cat that I've ever known, came racing across the field to greet us. This was the most friendly cat I've ever seen. We really wanted to take her home with us. Of course, she already had a home, and then also my husband is allergic to cats. We absolutely fell in love with this cat, and Julia carried her around the farm for quite a while, and she was very happy with that. I always like to incorporate a lot of texture into my layouts, especially areas that are a solid color. In this layout, the cut file has the words my and life, and I wanted to add a little bit more to those 2 words. So I cut out the cut file again. I cut the words my and life out of the cut file, and then I used an embossing folder to make some texture on both of them. And right now they're just laying on top of the cut file. I still have to attach those down. I again used the Vintage Photo to ink the edges of the butterflies. And now I'm attaching them down to their spots on the cut file. However, I am going to be moving those around a little bit. I wanted to add another element to the layout. I noticed there was a whitish area on the top right-hand side of the layout and then another smaller one on the lower left-hand side. So I thought that I would cut out an area of pattern paper and then put another piece of plain pattern paper behind it. This neutral pattern paper was one of the papers that was included in the March kit. When I made the last layout that I posted on my channel, I cut the corners that I wasn't going to use off of one of the pattern papers. So I was happy that I did that because now I have some neutral paper to mount behind these 2 cutouts. I wanted to use a piece of pattern paper that was light in color because I knew I wanted to use these chicken wire laser cut pieces. As soon as I saw them, I absolutely love them, and I thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to use them. Luckily, there were 2 similar die cuts, both of them chicken wire, so I had one for the top cutout and I will have one for the bottom cutout, which I'm going to start working on in a little bit. I wanted to make sure that the chicken wire was properly mounted on top of that piece of pattern paper before the glue dried. And then I went ahead and I did the same thing to the bottom. I cut out a section of paper, I distressed the edge, I mounted the chicken wire on a piece of neutral pattern paper. I distressed the edge of the background paper a little bit more. And now I have the 2 cutouts complete. This is when I decided to move the butterflies over to the edge of the 2 cutout areas. I know that earlier I added one of those large flat leaves to the cluster on the top left of the layout, but for some reason it wasn't there anymore, so I added it back in. And then I added a little bit more gel medium to hold that cluster down. To the left of my layout, you could see the Sizzix 3D embossing folder that I used to put texture on the words my and life. I added some gel glue to the cut file, and then I layered the word life on top of it, and then I do the same thing to the word my. I think that just adds a little bit of extra interest and texture to the layout. I was thinking of placing some sentiments between the words living and best. I don't end up leaving those there. And then I added a yellow side-facing butterfly to each of the 3 clusters. The one on the bottom is rather large and the other 2 are a little bit smaller. I like to add branches to my clusters. If you've been with me for a while, you might know that's one of my favorite touches to add. I used a die that was in my stash and I cut out a number of these small branches. To die cut these branches, I used a neutral off-white paper that was in the March kit. These are very small branches. They just add a little bit of extra texture and interest, and they add a light color back into those clusters. So I tucked a few of them into each of the 3 large floral clusters. I also tuck a couple around the cut file. There are some by the letter E and over by the N and the G, and then a couple of other places as well. I attach all of those down with some gel glue, and now I'm using some Finnabair heavy gesso, and I'm adding some white highlights to all of the flowers. I add the gesso to the buds and the branches that are in each of the clusters as well. You could see that the white shows up far better on the dark green flowers than the light green flowers. I just think this adds a nice highlight to the flowers and makes them look even more dimensional. The white gesso was the very last touch. This layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. This layout came together rather quickly, I believe because of the large cut file. It made the layout super easy to put together. Please take a look in the description box where you can check out all of the beautiful kits that My Creative Scrapbook has available this month. The limited edition kit is wonderful if you like brands like 49 and Market and Prima. The limited edition kit is my favorite, but there are other kits as well. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.